Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Doug Salas, MDeverywhere's Vice President of Development. For those not familiar with MDeverywhere, we are a single-source RCM and EMR solution provider with technology and best practice medical billing services proven to improve the claims process, decrease denials, and increase collections 10 to 15%. Thank you for joining us today for our Express webinar, GEMS, the Crosswalk between ICD-9 and ICD-10. Just a couple housekeeping points before I get started. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all registrants via email, along with a link to a PDF copy of the presentation. Attendees will be muted during the presentation, but we expect you may have questions. So please type your questions in the questions chat window on your control panel as you think of them, and we will follow up with you after the Express webinar. So without further delay, let's jump into GEMS. October 1st, 2014. For quite a while now, that has been the date when we would transition over to ICD-10. On Monday of this week, however, the U.S. Senate voted to pass the Protecting Access to Medicare Act of 2014, which both preserves the pay rate for doctors treating Medicare patients and also pushes back the compliance date for ICD-10. Today, this was indeed signed by President Obama, effectively pushing the implementation of ICD-10 until at least October 2015. Delay or not, the push to ICD-10 remains as important as ever, and the strategies, tools, and systems that will work with the new code set are critical to success. What is required to prepare for ICD-10? Well, remember NPI. The migration to ICD-10 is much larger than any previous national initiative, NPI included, and it's certainly the most complex initiative in the history of healthcare. According to the MGMA, less than 10% of physician practices have made significant progress toward preparing for the upcoming conversion to ICD-10. So let's jump right in. The title of this webinar is a Crosswalk Overview. So let's first understand what a crosswalk actually is. In defining a crosswalk, Webster's really only gives us one definition: a marked part of a road where pedestrians have right of way to cross. For our purposes of negotiating ICD-10, this really doesn't do us much good. A better definition for our needs would be a specification for mapping one metadata standard to another. In simple terms, a crosswalk is meant to create a map between two different data models. That is, once you have identified an element from, say, Group 1, you can use a crosswalk to find a corresponding element in Group 2. So for the sake of our discussion today, we're obviously talking about using a crosswalk to navigate between ICD-9 and ICD-10 code sets. In a perfect world, we'd have our nice ICD-9 code that we've been using for decades. We'd run it past our trusty crosswalk, and then voila, we'd have our ICD-10 code. Our coding is finished, and we move on. Sorry to say that we're not in that perfect world. So before we jump into GEMS, the topic of this webinar, it's important to make a few points. Crosswalking is not a substitute for learning and fully implementing ICD-10 into your practice. There's information that can be lost or gained when ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes are crosswalked to one another. Just like when translating between English and any other foreign language, there are situations where the meaning of words are not exact and they can convey different meanings. Not using the diagnosis code that most accurately represent the patient's condition will impact the integrity of the data. Secondly, crosswalks are meant to be temporary. Crosswalks leverage an in-depth knowledge of a source data set. They're meant to facilitate a transition from one code set to another, in the process, helping one gain a better understanding of the target code set along the way. And finally, there is no real crosswalk for ICD-9 and ICD-10. Sorry. In fact, the user guide for GEMS, which is distributed by CMS, clearly states this. After all, what would be the point of migrating to ICD-10 if you could simply crosswalk from one code set to the other? So what exactly is GEMS? Well, GEMS is an acronym for General Equivalence Mapping, and GEMS are delivered as data files. They're downloadable straight from the CMS website, and there's a file for mapping from ICD-9 to ICD-10 and ICD-10 to ICD-9. There is terminology used between these. When GEMS is used to map from 9 to a 10 code, this is called forward mapping, and when used from a 10 code to a 9 code, it's called backward mapping. As mentioned earlier, GEMS is not an exact crosswalk between the code sets. Due to changes in structure and concepts in ICD-10, there simply isn't an exact one-to-one matching across the entire code sets. GEMS was developed by the NCHS, and its primary purpose is to serve as a tool for implementing ICD-10. That is, its value lies in those situations where a transition is occurring, where the ICD-9 code is used to find the ICD-10 code, leveraging a well-known knowledge of the former code base. So remember, GEMS will not be maintained on an ongoing basis after the ICD-10 compliance date has passed. In fact, only for 3 years after that compliance date. So by October 1st of 2018, that will be the last time GEMS will be updated. So let's see GEMS in action. We'll use a few examples here. The first one I'm showing, and this is all coming from our Practice First application, but as I mentioned, GEMS is really just a collection of data files. It's only when they're loaded into a relational database that they provide value. So here we're using ICD code 414.11, aneurysm of coronary vessels. When we click the Look Up ICD-10 button, we'll transverse through the GEMS mappings to look for applicable codes in the ICD-10 dictionary. In this particular case, there is a one-to-one match to an ICD-10 code, I25.41. Obviously, this is one of those cases where moving between ICD-9 and ICD-10 is fairly straightforward. Let's look at some other examples. In this particular example, we're using an originating code from ICD-9 of 648.01, diabetes mellitus of mother. Using GEMS to provide a map to the suitable ICD-10 code returns a list of approximate codes. In this case, there are 5 ICD-10 codes. We can select any one of these and attach them to the encounter. Now we use the term approximate a few times already, and approximate is used to describe a data flag delivered through GEMS. So let's talk a little bit more about flags and what they actually are and how GEMS makes use of them. Flags in computer speak have only 2 possible values. They're either on or off, or yes or no, or true or false, but really use bits and are either 1 or 0s in data storage. In the GEMS data files, there are 3 core flags that will help computer systems, like our Practice First, most effectively use the data. Flags will govern how much automation or automation selection can be performed. The first flag is approximate. This is used to identify whether the map from ICD-9 to ICD-10 represents an identical match, which would be a one-to-one translation, or whether this is simply, as the name suggests, an approximation. For these approximate cases, there may be more than one possible match. The second flag used in GEMS is the no map flag. If this flag is set to true, it means there is no plausible translation between the code sets. If it's set to false, it means there's at least one possible translation. And lastly, the third flag is the combination flag. This means that the source code, say ICD-9, if that's what we're using as an origin, maps to more than one ICD-10 code. And this is different from the approximate flag in that it indicates that the source code needs multiple codes from the target code set in order to communicate the same information. We'll take a look at an example that uses the combination flag in just a moment. So with thousands and thousands of rows of translation data in the GEMS files, it's these 3 flags that are important indicators for exactly how much crosswalking can be done. In Practice First, we use and leverage this data to make automation decisions that can significantly reduce coding time. In this example, we're using ICD-9 code 290.20, senile dementia with delusional features. When we use GEMS to find an equivalent code in ICD-10, there are 2 codes that are presented. But unlike in our previous example, these codes cannot be selected individually. Thus, you'll see they're grouped together vertically. These 2 ICD-10 codes, along with the ICD-9 code, have been marked with a combination flag as set to true. So in this example, these are combined codes, and one click will link them both to the ICD-9 code. In these examples, we've been using forward mapping to move from ICD-9 to ICD-10, but the same can be done from backward mapping from 10 to 9. Now, we could spend all afternoon going through various scenarios, including even some very strange fringe cases, such as something called no mirror image, where the map from ICD-9 to ICD-10 is not a mirror image of the ICD-10 to ICD-9 map. But for the purpose of this express webinar, we'll stop with the examples here. As you'll see from the chart on your screen, GEMS will be a useful tool. In roughly 73% of the cases, when translating from ICD-9 to ICD-10, there will be a single code returned from GEMS. This means selection will generally be simple and straightforward in these cases. But another way to look at these numbers is that only 1/4 of the ICD-9 codes will have an exact match in ICD-10. This limits the amount of automation that can be done. It will not be possible, or rather clinically responsible, to automatically map an ICD-9 code to an ICD-10 code, even if there is only one approximate match. The simple fact is that it's an approximate code, and this precludes a system from performing this auto-translation. Nonetheless, a user armed with a good knowledge of the ICD-9 code set can leverage a system that uses GEMS to minimize the amount of added work that the ICD-10 migration will bring, all the while incorporating the benefits that the new code set brings. The reality is that GEMS will help to ease the transition to ICD-10, but it is not going to be the long-term solution. There's no silver bullet, and training and education is a huge component of the ICD-10 migration. As mentioned earlier, GEMS will only be updated for a 3-year period after the initial implementation. So what else is there? In addition to GEMS, there are other things a system should provide to assist with coding in ICD-10. We've been developing our solution to Practice First for several years now, and here are some of the things that we have found important. Search. Search is going to be the key here for ICD-10. Searching must extend beyond actual codes and archaic or cryptic descriptions that are associated with the code. Instead, a good solution will incorporate multiple dictionaries and code sets, such as the SNOMED CT. Frequently used lists, such as my lists or frequently used codes, will still have importance in the ICD-10 world, but with all of the added specificity of ICD-10, the underlying construct of a my list must be redefined to include the additional codes. We've found that wildcards are a viable solution here, maintaining the convenience of picking a well-known code, but allowing the further refinement and selection so that the appropriate diagnosis is conveyed, and of course, maximum reimbursement is possible. Natural language parsing. This goes hand in hand with search and is really where diagnosis selection will occur, using clinical keywords mixed with natural language and keywords like with, without, and allows searching ICD-10 and can produce great results with very high accuracy rate. And finally, there's the support for non-covered entities. This, of course, is probably a whole subject on its own and requires separate discussion, but a system should be able to recognize what the capabilities are of the payer. If you're seeking reimbursement for your services, which I assume you are, you'll need to send the appropriate diagnosis code. While it's nice to think that the migration to ICD-10 will be like flipping a switch, the reality is that it won't, not in the least bit. There will be payers that are ready to handle ICD-10, and there will be payers that, despite the mandate, are simply unable to. And for an indefinite period of time, there will be entities, non-covered entities, which may not be required to support ICD-10. It's important that systems factor the date of service and payer readiness into the coding solution. So take GEMS, improve search mechanisms, add support for natural language searching, and implement a system that can traverse through ICD-9 and ICD-10 easily, and then enjoy the transition to ICD-10, whether it's 2015 or 2016 or whenever it happens. Quick note about MDeverywhere. With ICD-10 ready, purpose-built revenue cycle management technology and a full suite of claims processing back-end services to physicians combined with a fully integrated 2014 certified EHR solution, we're positioned as a leading single source for all your revenue cycle and EMR needs. Our solutions aid clients in meeting guidelines and also maximizing revenue for all of their patient visits. We also have an NCQA certified CBO and credentialing division, making us a full-service company. Our client base across all of our product lines consists of approximately 7,000 physicians nationwide in over 40 different specialties, helping them with all their RCM, EMR, and credentialing needs. Today's viewers are welcome to contact MDeverywhere directly with any questions or for more information about our revenue cycle services or EMR solution. 2014 is certain to present challenges the likes we've never seen in decades, and it's important to be working with a partner who can help you navigate these changes successfully. Our RCM technology is ICD-10 ready, whether it's 2015 or 2014 or 2016. We've successfully completed the first CMS claim submission test done the week of March 3rd through the 7th using ICD-10 codes with a 100% claim submission rate. We'll follow up to submitted questions after the webinar, and a link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all registrants. Our next webinar is Tuesday, April 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Topic is Bundled Payment for Care Improvement, or BPCI. This should be especially relevant to cardiologists, cardiovascular surgeons, orthopedists, orthosurgeons, and hospitalists. We invite you to register via the link in upcoming events section located in the footer of the MDeveryware homepage. Thanks again for spending your time with MDeveryware today.